Welcome back to the book club. Today I'm going to be doing a retrospective on Robert Jordan and the first 11 books of the Wheel of Time series. I finished Knife of Dreams about a week ago. I'm currently about a third of the way through book number 12. And so I figured this was a good opportunity to stop and kind of reflect on the Wheel of Time series up until Jordan died and Brandon Sanderson took over. From what I understand, there are some snippets of things and that Jordan still wrote that end up in the final three books. I think like the epilogue of the whole series is Jordan, and obviously the outlining of a lot of the main events is still Jordan. So I think there's still some more Jordan in my future in little bits and pieces, but I want to talk a little bit about how I think he handled the first 11 books of the series, what I think about it so far. And this is going to be a video full of spoilers about the first 11 books. I only know a few of the events that happen in book 12. I don't know how the series ends, and I think that maybe it'll be interesting to revisit this in a month when I finish the series and see if any of my opinions on some of these things change once I have the full knowledge of where the story ends. But largely, I think this video is going to be pretty positive towards Jordan overall anyway, so I don't expect my major opinions are going to change on how I think of him as a writer and how I think of the story so far. Obviously, I've read 11 books so far, and so I think if you get to this point, you're probably going to finish the series and you probably like it enough. I've passed the slog, which I want to talk about a little bit in this video, and kind of what my thoughts were on that. But obviously, book 11 was really good, and it really hooked me into the last three, and I'm planning on reading those basically as fast as I possibly can. So how I want to start this is talking about some of the things I think Jordan does particularly well as an author. Maybe one of his strong suits, or like something he does better than most other authors out there that I've read. And that thing is also well suited to a 14-book series like what he embarked on. Although maybe it was originally supposed to be less books, I don't know. But what he does extremely well is world building. And I think the way that he does it is also quite expert, and it really helps you as a reader get into the world and become part of it and really feel like you belong there, and really helps you contextualize what's going on in the story with all the various characters. There's so many characters across so many different types of societies that it can be very hard to keep up with, but I think the way that Jordan introduces all these concepts helps with that. So one of the things he does from the very beginning of the book is that besides the prologue, you basically start off in Emansfield with our core group of characters. We don't have Elaine yet, but you have Rand al'Thor, and you have Mat, and you have Perrin, Nynaeve, and Egwene, and they go off on an adventure. And they've never left Emansfield, just like we as readers haven't really left Emansfield. And so the way that he kind of builds his world from there is that Moiraine gives them bits and pieces, and they sort of discover what the world is like outside of their little pocket, over in the Shire, along with us as readers. So Jordan's able to build the world gradually right at the same time that the characters are actually learning that world as well. And as readers, we had to cheat a little bit because one character goes off in this direction and one goes off in that direction. And then we get kind of two different cities maybe that we're kind of building up and learning the culture of. And so we kind of follow these, core characters' paths through the world. And as that unravels, we learn more about the cultures. And kind of the first trilogy, the first three books, builds up most of the main continent. I guess I don't know what the name of it is, but the main lands that the book takes place in, you have Andor, and you have Morandi, and you have Tyr and Cairhien, and all these places. You get bits and pieces of some of them, and they get expanded on in later books, but you kind of get a feel for what the general, some of the key areas throughout the book are and what the cultures are like here. And then you also learn a little bit about the Aiel and the seafaring, or the sea folk, sorry. But you don't really, they're kind of still a mystery for the most part until like the very end of book 3. Then books 4 through 6, you actually learn about the Aiel and more about the sea folk, and sort of build on their cultures, especially the Aiel in like books 4 and 5. You learn a lot about them, and then you understand how these cultures come together. And I think, again, that's another like world building accolade to give to Jordan, he really is able to explore, and I think he enjoyed exploring the way that different cultures interact with each other, especially when there's the Aiel who are very different from the rest of the world. You understand how there's kind of little petty wars between the various like Tyr and Cairhien or whatever. I don't even know if they're at war, whatever. But you know, you have little squabbles between the countries that you kind of understand because they all are a little bit different, but kind of the same. And then you have the Aiel who are totally different. Don't understand the Wetlanders at all. They're kind of all just weirdos to them, and vice versa. And then you understand how those cultures clash and how they kind of meld together. You have people that are from Cairhien who are kind of pretending to be Aiel and think that that's a cool thing to do. And all this is just like Jordan's incredible world building, which is kind of just underlying the entire plot, which is what initially hooked me in. So he's built all these layers of things over time that hook you in and just are details that the plot kind of sits on top of, where obviously the way that the Aiel interact with different people is going to be important to the plot in certain ways. But we as readers, we learn gradually more and more about this world, more about how the cultures interact, how they don't interact too well. And then also, not to mention kind of the later half of the first 11 books when the Seanchan really come back in full force. We learn a little bit about them in, I think, book 2 it is. But they really come back and there's a whole new culture now. We've kind of learned all the other ones at this point, and there's finally this, I think, last culture that's, again, very different from how the rest of the world works, that's starting to interact with everybody else in interesting ways. And you kind of understand, oh, how do these people deal with the empire that they're from, and how do they deal with commoners, and how do they treat people who can wield the source? It turns out the Seanchan collar them and, you know, have the whole Soldam domain thing going on. But all that is to say that I don't even know how that ends up affecting the end of the story, and it's still all very interesting and compelling to me. So I think it's probably the best part of the series overall. And it's something that's kind of kept me going through the low points, is wanting to know more about how these cultures interact and just know more about them in general. I was really excited in book 4, learning more about the Aiel and their culture and the whole Rhuidean thing. I think that's the name of the city. I get Rhuidean and Rhuarc. I think Rhuarc is the guy and Rhuidean is the name of that city that they go to. But that was like an incredibly compelling thing. I'm on book 12 now. I still want to learn more about the Seanchan. I'm learning more about Tuon as we speak, and I really want to know how she kind of interfaces with the Dragon Reborn and how that situation pans out and what happens after the last battle, if the Seanchan are still around to try to continue conquering the world, or if that whole plan doesn't work. But all these different cultural motivations that also push the characters in different directions is very interesting to me, and like who makes alliances with who plays into all that as well. So I think that's probably the biggest thing that Jordan does well in this series. And in the second thing that he does well, but to maybe a different degree, because some of it's good and some of it I don't think is that good, is his character building. I think some of his characters are really good, like the Dragon Reborn Rand. I want to know what's going on with him. The whole madness that's affecting him is really interesting. I think Mat is really fun. He's just a kind of like wacky gambler guy who I think has fun interactions with all the people that he's around. And that's really awesome to read. I think there's characters like Moiraine and Cadsuane and some of the Aes Sedai throughout the story that are really interesting to read just because of how different they are. Sorry, cat crossing here. Because of how different they are from other characters in the series. But then the reason why I wouldn't say characters are his number one accolade is there's also characters that annoy me a lot. And again, this is maybe something that's going to change when I finish the series, because once I know how these story arcs resolve, maybe I can look back at some of the moments I don't like and I realize, oh, that was actually super important. I should have paid more attention. Or if I ever reread the story, I'll pay more attention and I can appreciate it. But characters like Nynaeve, who at this point in the story has turned around, but throughout, I think like books 4 through 6, maybe, whenever they did the whole circus arc thing, and whenever Nynaeve and Elaine were kind of stuck in Saladar, that I just like couldn't stand reading any of the Nynaeve chapters. But basically, Nynaeve before Lan came back, and they kind of just like she grew up a lot. I think just over the course of like a single few chapters in a book, she suddenly became a better character. But she had a long time in the middle where I was just really frustrated reading her because these characters' internal monologues are all so unique and like well fleshed out, I think, which is something that I think Jordan did well, where you're inside Nynaeve's head and she's just like constantly angry at the world. And when she's blocked from channeling, I think that's kind of the period where she was most annoying. She could only channel when she's angry. The problem is that she just kept having the same loops going on in her head over and over again, which is maybe realistic, but not fun to read. When like she just keeps thinking these thought loops of like, oh, this person's so annoying, or blah blah blah, or oh, I can't channel because I'm not angry enough, and blah 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 blah. It's just she talked in her head in circles so much that I became frustrated. Even if it was realistic, it was just, maybe annoying storytelling to get the point across. And another character like this is Elaine. And my main problem with Elaine is just that her plot is really boring still. I don't think I've really been that interested in anything she's doing except for parts of the plot line with the Bowl of the Winds. Just because I wanted to know what the Bowl of Winds was going to do and if it was going to fix the weather. And Elaine was a part of that. But I think the whole royal succession of Andor stuff, and like her becoming the queen, et cetera, et cetera. I don't care about this. When Rand and her finally get it on and she gets pregnant, I don't care. Her constantly talking about how she's pregnant and, oh, my babies are going to be fine because Min said so. I just didn't care at all. I still don't care. I'm hopeful that her plot line also, like Nynaeve's, turns around and I'm going to begin to like her again. But thus far into the story, 12 and a third books in, she's just been annoying, and I wish I was reading somebody else. And maybe I have similar thoughts on Perrin and Faile, but I'll save that for later because I don't want to complain about these points specifically too hard. So I think he does some characters really well. Some characters were kind of frustrating, and maybe that means that he did them well, but I don't know if that was his point yet. So I guess I can't say for sure. We'll see. Maybe Elaine makes a turnaround and I'm like, I get it. That was character growth and I needed to be annoyed with her for 12 and a half books. And then she does something awesome and I'm totally on team Elaine now. We'll find out. Now, next up, I wanted to talk a little bit. I know this is kind of just a rambling stream of consciousness thoughts. But I'm just kind of bouncing around to the things that come to my mind as I'm reflecting on this series. What I wanted to talk about next was the slog in books 7 through 10. It depends on who you ask, but people typically say around book 7 through 10 is when the slog happens. I had an interesting experience with the slog, and I'll say, my original plan for reading this series, I started it in, I want to say August or September of last year, and right now it's May. So it's been about 8 months since I started reading the book, approximately 8 or 9 months, maybe. My initial plan was to read one book a month of The Wheel of Time, and then I would read 2 or 3 other books in between. Once I read the Wheel of Time book for the month, I would go read a couple other books and then come back to the series. And so my plan was to finish the series in a little over a year. It would be a year and 2 months, finish it in 14 months, and that was going to be the cadence I would go with. And so for the first 7 or maybe 8 books, that's what I stuck to. But then, and I actually don't, for me personally, 7 and 8 were actually pretty good. I didn't really feel like they slowed down too much. I didn't really feel like I was in much of a slog yet. But once I started reading book 9, that's actually when I decided to, instead of taking a break in between books, I would just continue reading straight through, because 9 is when I got really bored for about the first half of the book. And then I honestly don't even remember what the turning point was in book 9 that made me excited again. maybe it was actually, now that I'm recalling, I think it was the far matting stuff, which led to eventually the cleansing of Sidene or Sidar, whatever, Sidene, I think. Um, that was obviously a huge moment in the series, and I think that made book 9 actually a good book overall. But the first half of it was very, very dull, very boring, in my opinion. And so I decided at that point, I'm just going to keep reading on to book 10. I know that from what I've heard, book 11, the last Jordan book, is really solid. It picks up the pace. It really brings you towards the last battle a lot closer than the other books. So I was like, I'm just going to kind of bum rush through these books to keep them going. So I read book 9 pretty quickly because I just wanted to get through it. And then book 10, I think, was the fastest book that I read because 3/4 of it I was bored out of my mind and was just kind of reading as fast as possible so that I could get to the good part. And luckily, the last quarter of the book was good. But I think fundamentally, for me at least, the slog really is books 9 and 10. And the main reason for the slog for me was 2 plot lines that I think ground the story to a halt because they were dragged on for too long and didn't get a resolution until book 11. So those plot lines are, number 1 is Faile getting captured by the Shaido and Perrin having to rescue her, which I think she gets captured at the end of book 9. And then the other plot line was, I mentioned it earlier, but Elaine's whole thing with becoming the Queen of Andor, where I don't even remember when that starts. I want to say like book 8 or 9 is when she finally shows up back at Andor and is trying to rally people to her cause. And I don't know if it could have been written better because I don't know what the constraints were at the time. I don't know if maybe he didn't know where the plot lines were going and he was just kind of writing them while pushing along other plot lines until he found his footing, found out where they were going to go. Or maybe there was just, I don't know, book size constraints that kept him constrained to what he could do. But my thoughts on if I, with perfect hindsight and also not having finished the book, so I'm obviously the perfect candidate for this task, if I were to restructure the books to make them better and not actually cut anything, assuming I had to keep it all, I would have resolved Faile's capture with Perrin and teaming up with the Seanchan and blah blah blah. Resolve that all in book 10. Just Faile gets captured at the end of book 9. The first half of book 10 has all the Perrin scenes where he's meeting up with the Seanchan, and like 3/4 of the way through book 10, or maybe tied with the other ending of book 10, which I don't even remember which thing got resolved there. Perrin saves Faile, and that's just done. And while that's happening, just don't talk about Elaine at all. Elaine is not there. She's out of it. We just leave her be, secreted away in Caemlyn or whatever, and we don't talk to her. Then come back to Elaine's plotline and wrap her plotline up all in one book, whether that's like book 9 or book 10 or book 11, wherever it would have fit. If you just took Elaine out of the story for a little bit and took Faile and Perrin out of the story for a little bit and had one book where their entire arc was resolved, I think the pacing would have been a lot better, because instead what you get is, over the course of like 3 books, Elaine is slowly gaining trust with people in Andor and she has this whole battle thing, but it gets resolved extremely quickly. She has the confrontation with the Black Ajah. She gets taken. Birgitte basically rescues her and then wins a battle. And then all of a sudden, Elaine's queen. Like, that could have happened any of the books prior without all the BS about, oh, Lord blah blah and Lord blah blah don't like you, but Lord blah blah does. Like, none of these people matter to me. Maybe they're important in the last battle and I'm going to eat my words, but like, I don't give a shit about any of them. I don't care at all. The only person I remember is Lord Dylan or whatever her name is. Just have her in the background, be like, oh yeah, she got all the support you need. Don't worry, girl, you're good. And that would have been a better plot line, in my opinion. But maybe Robert Jordan was really into writing the political fantasy of it all and got kind of carried away there. I don't know. But I think that being resolved just in a single book, and then don't like leave Elaine out of it for a book if you need to, because you need to catch other plot lines up. Um, there's precedence for doing this in his series before. There's entire books with no Perrin in them. There's entire books with no Mat in them. Just do the same thing. Have no Elaine instead of giving me like 2 or 3 Elaine chapters where nothing happens in a book. Just cut those out completely. Move them all to another book. And then the same thing with Perrin and Faile. We get throughout book 10. There's just this kind of frustrating, like plodding along that Perrin is doing while trying to look for Faile, and then Faile's side of things is actually a bit more interesting, but there's no resolution in book 10. You don't get the resolution until the end of book 11, where finally there's actually like 4 different events that all happen simultaneously. You have like Mat, Elaine, Perrin, and probably something with Rand happens at the very end of book 11, and you could have just moved a couple of those earlier. I think it was very frustrating to read like 2 chapters or 3 chapters where Perrin is just like, I'm trying to find my wife. I'm trying to find my wife. I'm trying to find my wife. But he doesn't get anywhere. And then the book ends and you're like, what happened? Like, what was the point of all that stuff? This book could have been shorter if they just removed Perrin from it and caught up with him later. So I guess that is all to say. I felt personally book 7 and 8 were pretty good and well paced. Maybe I guess the main problem with book 8 is just that it felt like the battle with Rand and the Seanchan, where he used Callandor and like both armies thought they lost. I felt like the book should have ended there rather than continuing on for another few hundred pages, where eventually like Perrin gets attacked by his own Ashaman, and that is kind of the ultimate conclusion. I think maybe that book could have ended a little sooner and then moved some of the events into the next book. But I think the main, for me, I think what I've identified as my problems, like why I was so bored in books 9 and 10, was just there was things happening with characters that didn't get any resolution for so long that I was getting bored, because I wasn't getting any sort of dopamine. There was no positive interactions where I felt like Perrin was making progress, or I felt like Elaine was actually making progress with her plot line. It just felt like she was spinning her wheels. And so for me, reading the book, I felt like I was just wasting my time getting nowhere. And I think the other plot lines were actually pretty interesting, so I wanted to get back to them. I wanted to read more about what was going on with Mat post Bowl of the Winds, and his escape from Ibu Dar and all that stuff. And of course, I'm always wanting to learn more about what's going on with Rand and like how crazy actually is he, and all of this stuff. So I feel like the slog, on one hand, it actually pushed me to read the books faster because I wanted to get through the slog back to the good part. And now I'm, on pace to, by the end of this month, within a couple weeks from now, I'm going to finish the series. So at least it kind of invigorated my interest in the series. But at the same time, there was so much detail that didn't feel like it needed to be there, or it just felt so misplaced that it was hard to read. And I think if I didn't know that I would be satisfied by the end of it, and I only know that because of how many people have said that that's the case, and I believe them. I don't know if I would have pushed through. If I was reading this as it was being published, I probably would have given up on it and been like, you know what, screw this. I'll come back in 10 years and see if the series is done and then maybe pick it back up. But luckily, I'm living in the future. The whole series is out. I know that it ends in a satisfying way. People say the slog is worth it. I trust them, and I can read fast enough when I want to that I was able to, speed read through the slog and the boring chapters and kind of get the meat that I wanted out of it. All right, next up, I wanted to talk a little bit about, hello, kitty. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of Jordan's writing quirks that I just noticed over the course of reading his 11 books. And I've seen Sanderson emulate them in slightly different ways, which I think is funny. I think he's, purposely paying homage to Jordan, trying to keep his style while also making it a little bit more a little less Jordan, I guess, is maybe what I'll say. And so I want to give some examples. I wrote some examples down on my phone here. So there's a lot of these that everyone knows about them. They're joked about all the time, but folding arms under breasts is, the Jordan classic. This is how I imagine it's looking. Jordan probably wrote that phrase 400,000 times, and I think it makes up about 15% of the series overall. But it's really hard to not pick up on the fact that he reuses the same phrase over and over and over again whenever there are women in the scene talking and they're maybe a little bit angry or annoyed by something. There's, of course, every character has their hallmark twitches, or maybe not every character does, but a lot of them do. For example, Nynaeve has her braid tugging. Basically, every woman will smooth her skirts over and over again. And that's kind of their hallmark thing. But also the way that, so Jordan is a very descriptive author, and he describes everybody's clothing to almost an incredible extent. And I've noticed actually there's this section of book 12 where I noticed that Sanderson was doing the Jordan thing on purpose. And I've read all of Sanderson's Cosmere stuff, and I know he doesn't normally do this, and he was doing this because it's Jordan's style. Where Sanderson actually kind of paused the scene to describe what every single woman was wearing. It was like 3 or 4 Aes Sedai meeting up, and he paused the scene basically to describe, oh, this one was wearing a yellow dress with this frills and this lace and whatever, and it went up to her neck, and this one wore a dress that went up to her, mid chest, or this one had a deep plunging neckline, blah blah blah, and these are the jewels that she was wearing. I think that's maybe Jordan's number one, I don't know if that's even a writing quirk, but number one stylistic thing is that he gets really in depth about what things look like what people are wearing and what buildings look like, which can get annoying and has gotten annoying to me sometimes. But I think especially the setting, what the settings look like, that I appreciate a lot, because it really helps, again, tie in with the world building. It brings you into the world. You understand how people are dressing, what the fashion is like in this area of the world, and how it's different from this other, piece of the world. He describes people's oh, this is a Terabon style dress versus a, I don't know, Tanchiko style dress, or these people dress in this way. In Ibu Dar, people have these marriage knife dagger things that they wear on their necks, and the gems mean different things and all this stuff. It's all inconsequential ultimately detail, where a lot of authors don't bother putting that much depth into their world because it's not going to last 14 books, so there's not time, and Jordan has the time to do that. And then there's also I'm going to go back to some more maybe annoying things that I've noticed him do, which is that every character, not every character, but it's all the Aes Sedai, he describes what their lips look like, which I don't know if I've ever noticed anybody else do that. Where I've never seen the term rosebud lips so often, and I don't know what that means. I don't know if it's when they're resting, their face is like a duck face kind of thing. I don't know what rosebud lips means, but he says rosebud lips or full lips, or she had thin lips or whatever. It's just his his writing stim is writing about people's lips. And then the other area is that he always describes what their bosom looks like. Again, I don't know how often I read the word bosom, or how often I've read it outside of the Wheel of Time. I've probably read it 100,000 times in the Wheel of Time. And again, a solid 5% of the series is made up of describing how full each Aes Sedai's bosom was or wasn't. But it is something, again, I've actually seen Sanderson use the word breasts instead of bosom, which I actually think is more normal. Or maybe he just uses the word breasts more often and doesn't use the word bosom that often. But I've kind of noticed a little bit of a difference in how Sanderson uses some of Jordan's descriptions or stylistic things, but doesn't necessarily fully emulate him, which I think is for the better. Sanderson has his own style, and you can sometimes see it come through in his sections. Now that I'm reading through book 12, But he does definitely try to emulate the way that Jordan tells a story, like takes breaks from scenes to describe the scenery and that kind of thing. So I think that's all. It all goes into who the author is. Uh, one Sanderson quirk actually, while we're here, that I've noticed in book 12 is, and Sanderson does this in his books a lot, is he describes things as awesome. Not like, wow, that's totally cool, but like inspiring awe. He uses the word awesome a lot, and I've already noticed it like 2 or 3 times in book 12, which isn't a ton, but those are the kind of like, oh, what are the author's like favorite words or go-to descriptions for certain things? I'm sure I'm missing a ton of Jordan's, but those were the few that I wrote down while I was just thinking about some things to bring up while I'm talking about it. Now, the last thing, I've rambled on for I don't know how long at this point, too many minutes, and I could spend way too long talking about this and just talk in circles forever. But what I want to do is finally, I wrote down my character chapter tier list, and what I mean by this is like which characters chapters am I most excited to read to least excited. I rank them A through F, and the characters that I'm going to be talking about are Rand, Egwene, Mat. I wrote Perrin / Faile. I'm just combining them. And then Elaine and Nynaeve. So I think I've at least covered all of the core, like the ta'veren and the core people we keep going back to. There's obviously a bunch of characters that get little bits and pieces throughout. But I want to stick to the people that we see most of throughout the book. And so first off, I'll start with my A's. Both Rand and Mat are chapters that I'm always excited to read, especially Mat post, or I guess during the Ebu Dar plotline and afterwards, like now that he is the Prince of Ravens or whatever it's called, and like his whole interaction with Tuon, I was really into that. I thought it was really interesting. I really wanted to know where it was going to go, and I'm really looking forward to how Mat and his now marriage to the Seanchan like Empress or Empress to be or something. I don't exactly know what Tuon's going to be. But seeing how that evolves, I'm super interested in it, super curious. I like Mat as a character. I think Tuon is pretty fun as well. And she's like our first real insight into Seanchan people. I guess that's not true because there's like Egwene or whatever her name is. But Tuon is like even more Seanchan than she was. So it's a very unique point of view this late into the series. And I'm also very curious to see how, like, Tuon's a weird character, and I'm wondering how Sanderson writes her as well. There's already been one POV chapter from her, which was really good in book 12. So I think he's doing a good job. But she was somebody I was very interested in reading about in book 11 too, when she has her first POV chapter. You get inside her head and you're like, this is a weird relationship, and I'm very curious where it's going. The other A is Rand. I think most people probably put Rand in this bucket too. And something I think is interesting about the series is that we start off the first like trilogy is very Rand heavy, but, and I guess up to book 4 as well, is still pretty Rand heavy. But you go through this like long drought kind of after the Aiel Waste, and he comes back and starts, going crazy basically. Or maybe he started going crazy earlier because there's the whole thing leading up to Tyr. But he really starts, the madness starts developing, and like hearing the voice of Lews Therin and all that stuff. We actually start seeing less from Rand in books like 5 or 6 through up until where I am now. And my guess is that I'm going to start to see a little bit more about Rand, because he's obviously going to be a pivotal role in the last battle. He is the chosen one. But I think it's really interesting to take like the main character basically, and he's kind of just this background Lord of Chaos who's doing a bunch of things in the background, and we peek in on him like a couple times a book, and he has a big climactic moment, but a lot of the things he's doing we're just like not really too sure about. And I think that's pretty fun. I want to know more about what's going on. I'm really interested in learning how his whole plot line, which is like the plot line of the entire book, wraps up. And so he's just an easy top tier A character for me. Now for next up, I have Egwene at a B. I don't think I've talked about Egwene much at all, actually. And she's a character that I fluctuated on throughout the series. Um, I think that she, in the Saladar, or prior to her coming to Saladar and becoming the like rebel Amerlin seat, she started to kind of lull a little bit because she was just doing stuff in Teleran, Ran, Riyadh, whatever, the dream world. Um, and her plotline stopped evolving for a little bit. And then all of a sudden, she gets called to Saladar. She becomes the Amerlin seat. Um, and this big exciting thing happens. And then it kind of lulls again when she is actually the Amerlin seat. But there's a lot of interesting things going on with the Aes Sedai and the different factions there, and she is the main eyes that we have to see that storyline. And so as a result, I've been interested in her chapters as like her character point of view chapters, even though I wouldn't rate her as like a B character arc that I care about. I don't actually care about her arc a ton until she got captured by Elida, and so now it's actually interesting again. But for the most part, I didn't really care that much about her character arc. It just wasn't important to me, or wasn't a big deal. But the plot line that she is within is interesting to me. I do want to know what's going to happen with the Aes Sedai. There's all sorts of problems with the Aes Sedai. They're like, I don't know. It's a very interesting group of people who are so like annoyingly smug about how much they know, except that they refuse to believe that things like traveling and blah 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 have been discovered, because they've kind of just become okay with the level of the one power they understand, and like stopped innovating and don't believe that any innovations are even possible, because they're like, we would have figured it out by now. That's how smug we are. And then Egwene comes in and kind of breaks that, partially because of Moghedien and all that stuff. But I think that, a lot of the things that go on with Egwene as a character, not that interesting, but the things going on around her are very interesting, and just like the societal role of the Aes Sedai in this world is interesting, and I want to know how that stuff goes. Next up, I have Nynaeve at C. Again, the circus arc, I was not a big fan of Nynaeve. Basically pre-Lan, which is when she finally breaks her block, and saves Lan, and they get together and get married. I would have rated her a lot lower, but I think that she basically went through this really rapid character growth with Lan, and now that's a very interesting arc for me. And I think it's the end of book 11 is when she drops Lan off at World's End and starts like rallying people to Malkir, the Malkir cause, and gets like the Malkirans to join him. And so I'm really looking forward to what develops there. I don't know how much of Nynaeve and Lan together I'm going to see again before like the last battle, presumably when they're going to meet up again. I'm hoping they meet up again earlier, but I'm interested in what's going on in Nynaeve land now. She's not as like just I'm an angry and annoyed all the time character, and I think that's I'm looking forward to it. Then at a D, I have Perrin and Faile. I think I've talked about this a bit already, but Perrin, before he met Faile, was just I don't know, a C. Maybe he was fine to read, but nothing interesting was going on except for the fact that he has this like wolf power. But the wolf power wasn't really getting explored, and so I kind of lost interest. Then he meets Faile, and things kind of just stagnate for a while. But then he just becomes obsessed with Faile, which gets to be annoying, and why I don't really like him as a character that much. I will say where I'm at in book 12, I think that's actually beginning to turn around. But honestly, I think it would have been a better book if Faile was just like killed off earlier and Perrin was sad about it for a little bit and then moved on, rather than him obsessing over Faile for 2.5 books to rescue her, and then she finally gets rescued, and there's like barely any time spent so far, at least, um, with them like together again. Like I wish that she would have been rescued prior to the end of book 11, so that there was more time to like build back up something. Um, but now I'm on book 12, and they're starting to. We have a couple scenes with parents so far, but I don't know. I'm not a fan of their relationship. I'm not a fan of like the way that Perrin acts most of the time. I do want him to get back to like his wolf brothers. I want actually in general, there hasn't been a lot of the dream world since like book 7 and 8 or so. I'd really like to see more of that too, and like what role Perrin and like the Wolf Dream plays with the Teleron Riode stuff. So I'm hopeful that Perrin will go up from a D to maybe a C or a B by the end, but right now he's my D. And then last but not least, I think of course is Elaine. I have her ranked at an F in terms of characters that I'm excited to read about. I wrote down she peaked in Tanchico and was downhill ever since. And Tanchico, I think, was book 2, or maybe book 3. Or no, Tanchico, I think, was book 4. Whatever. I'm forgetting when the earlier events happened, because we barely knew Elaine in book 2. But basically, after the Tanchico arc and the Black Aja thing happened, Elaine's arc has been incredibly boring. Her character has basically been like, I'm in love with Rand because because I'm fated to marry him, or be bonded to him as a ward or whatever. Like Min has a viewing about him being with Elaine or something along those lines. And so she's just obsessed with him for like 6 books when they never see each other, and then they see each other once and she gets pregnant with him, and she's still annoying, and constantly talking about it in her head. And the plot lines that she's a part of, I just don't care about at all. I did care about the Bowl of the Winds, so I guess that's, maybe I'm not entirely accurate there, but the circus thing that she goes through with Nynaeve is just like super dumb. I thought it was funny when the circus came back, but and it was actually better the second time with Matt, but the first circus arc was awful. And then the whole queen succession line is just, to me, it just felt like this is a different book. The houses of Andor and which houses have which people that are loyal to whom, it's just not important to me. I feel like the situation in Cairhien was handled a little bit better because it was quick. There was like a few different warring factions when Rand came over and took over. And then, whatever I don't even know when the last time we talked about the people in Cairhien has been, but they kind of just like resolved it really quickly. One of the people Rand sentenced to some punishment and she killed herself. And then there's kind of been no trouble in Cairhien since. And maybe under the hood there's been a bunch of trouble going on there, but I don't have to read about it, so I'm happy. I wish the same thing happened with Elaine becoming queen. I understand from a plot standpoint, like Rand giving Elaine a bunch of land and saying, hey, yeah, you're supposed to be the queen of this now because your mom's dead or whatever, like, even though she's not. So take this and, good luck. Obviously that couldn't have worked. And it makes sense that she did need to like win the trust of the people in order to, or the major houses at least. There's no democracy here. So it made sense that she needed to do that in order to become the queen. I just don't care for reading it because there's like 10 other plots that are going on that I think are better than her. There's the whole stuff going on with Matt. There's, the stuff going on with the Dragon Reborn and the cleansing of Saidin and blah, 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 blah. Like the whole Dark One coming and destroying the world, or fighting the last battle against Rand. That's better than learning about random houses that I hope that they never come back. I hope I don't need to care about anybody that she won over to win the throne. And I hope that they were just like useless pawns in a like little political story that Jordan was writing, but we'll see. But anyways, I've blabbered on enough about Elaine. She's an F. I'm hopeful that all these characters that I am not really too big of a fan of get bumped up maybe a couple letters. By the time I finish, maybe it's going to be super important in the last battle. Honestly, the thing I'm most curious about with Elaine is she has the Min had a viewing that her children are going to, or her child um is going to be fine, and because of that she takes a bunch of risks that are dumb. But if we ignore that, I'm curious if Elaine has a kid during these books, because it feels like the pace at which the last battle is coming isn't enough time for her to give birth. Um, because I don't know how many months it's been since she got pregnant in the by the end of book 11. Maybe it's been like a month or so. It feels like if the last battle is still like 8 more months away, that'd be crazy. So like, does she give birth after the last battle? She kind of can't channel because she's pregnant. Like, that's the only thing that is interesting to me about Elaine right now, and it kind of just happened to her. So I guess I'll see how that gets resolved. But at least there's something I'm looking forward to with each character, even if I think that they're not very interesting overall. Um, but yeah, I think I've talked even longer than I thought I would, going through all those characters. So I'm going to wrap it up there. Just a smattering of thoughts on the first 11 books of Wheel of Time and the stuff that Robert Jordan has written. I'm looking forward to kind of rewatching this video of my own to see if any of my opinions change when I finish the series in a few weeks. And hopefully some of my opinions do change, but we'll see. So if you enjoyed this video, let me know in the comments below. Please don't spoil anything for books 12 through 14, because I haven't read them yet, but also maybe people are watching this and they haven't read them yet either. So don't comment about anything like, oh yeah, it's super awesome when X does Y in book 13 or whatever. Don't want to know about it. I'll get there. But anyways, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.